Hey, before this video starts, I just wanted to announce that I put up the backgrounds that I made for Fossil Fighters 1, Champions, and Frontier up on Wallpaper Engine. If you'd like to have any of these as your wallpaper, all you have to do is download Wallpaper Engine on Steam and look up Fossil Fighters Scrolling BG, and you should see the 3 I made along with a bonus one based on Ratsie. Oh, look at that, she blushes. This isn't really an ad since I'm not sponsored, nor am I making any money off of this. It's just a cool thing I decided to do, and I really have to thank Echo Space for leaving this comment. I would have never thought of this on my own, and it's just such a fun idea. The link's down below if you want to download for yourself, and I hope you enjoy the video. Man, it was a good thing I cut the last video where I did. When I get started talking about retro game collecting, I can't help but go down a rabbit hole of how it's overpriced, how companies like Nintendo need to do better, and how piracy's tied into all that. And although that conversation is relevant to Fossil Fighters, it's not what you're here for, and it's a bit of a downer anyway. Though, if that is what you're here for, sorry, I guess. But let's get on topic. A few years after Fossil Fighters stomped and roared onto the scene, a sequel was released in 2010 for Japan and 2011 for the US, known as Fossil Fighters Champions, and spoiler alert, but this game is what many will tell you is the best in the series. And a quick spoiler alert for my own opinions, but I find that statement hard to argue. Fossil Fighters Champions doesn't just come out of the gate swinging, it pretty much blows said gate off of its hinges, and takes everything from the original and turns it up to not just 11, but 12. I don't think it's a perfect game, but it is one hell of a sequel. So how about we skip the foreplay and get right into why in God's name did I start a video about a children's dinosaur game like that? What is wrong with me? Starting off with the visuals once again, it's very clear that the visual teams got a lot better in a short span of time. This game's visuals are the reason I believe that the original's look was due to a lack of development time. Champions blows the first game out of the water when it comes to visuals. The overworld models are a lot more detailed, all the backgrounds and areas are a lot fuller, and realized with different unique eye-catching elements such as this giant skull-shaped rock, a volcano with horn-shaped rocks, an area where instead of traveling along the x-axis you travel up and down on the z-axis along a rock face. Okay, there's a lot more than just a bunch of interesting rocks, but you get what I'm saying. Champions has a lot more varied and more detailed filled locations. And while the first game did have some interesting places to check out, a lot of them were just differently colored flat areas, while Champions adds some verticality to the mix, like with this petrified wood area. Wait, that just counts as another interesting rock, doesn't it? Fuck! Though a big L to all my desert-loving viewers, as the desert in Champions is way worse than the one in the original, as this one is just a little room with a cutscene. I guess they ran out of ideas for this part. Probably should have just cut it out, all things considered, or maybe put a certain plot important location here. I mentioned the overworld models, and yes, this is the most night and day difference in the visual department, as all the characters are properly more detailed and animated, though I do miss those funny little animations from the original. Don't get me wrong, Champions has its fair share of cartoony animations, but it doesn't really hit the same as those in the original. I get that those were the way they were due to limitations, and I'm not asking for whatever the hell this run cycle was to come back. But I feel that a little of the charm is kind of runned off, though I do mean a little. A lot of the charm is here. What I'm talking about is really only a nitpick at the end of the day, and it doesn't really affect my opinion of the game. I just kind of missed it. Though it's time to tackle the elephant in the room, and that's how blurry this game can look. And there's no avoiding it, that's the look the team went for, it's not me making it all pixely. The game's art design called for it to be blurry, and I think it works in the game's favor. Look, detail on the DS wasn't exactly easy, and as though the little system could outdo systems like the N64 or PlayStation, there was no getting around that tiny screen, and the little system can only do so much. It wasn't a portable GameCube or PS2. So the blurry look was a best of both worlds, giving the illusion to massive amounts of detail while still fitting it in a tiny screen. And, you know, if we're being honest, to me blowing it up for the video like this is probably just making the whole blurry thing look a lot worse than it actually is. Sorry, I guess it's kind of unavoidable, really. But the developers made the right decision. The blur can make things look more detailed than they appear to be, saving space on the DS cart while still making things look impressive for the time. And if you remember, I had these same thoughts on the battle animations last time. The teams behind Fossil Fighters were really smart people. Instead of being discouraged by how limiting the DS could be, they saw it as a challenge to either skirt around or outsmart, and they did. Besides, they needed that extra space for something extra special. FMVs. Full motion video. These types of pre-rendered cutscenes were quite common on the home consoles, but not really as much on the handheld side. Well, I should say not really on the Nintendo handheld side, as the GBA could do FMVs, but it was really the DS that brought that kind of stuff into more prominence on the Nintendo end. And Champions here has decided to use it for itself, really strutting the team's animation chops to make some entertaining and well done cutscenes. Sure, maybe it would have been better to have these voiced instead of just text, but hey, that would have been kind of an unreasonable ask in this situation, and especially with the DS's vocal quality.
Just roll over and play dead, you know? No offense, Sir Ozzy. Huh? Oh, none taken, Lou.
It would have made for some funny memes though. But the visuals weren't the only thing that got quite the upgrade. The overworld gameplay for the most part is the same as the originals. You still walk around and search using your radar to find fossils. Not too much to really talk about there, all this is the same, except for the mask system. Now last time I neglected to really mention masks, as they were only a small cosmetic thing in the game, though the BB mask did make some funny little walking noises. But now in Champions, there are a few masks that actually have some more practical uses, such as helping you look for some specific typed fossils, which can really help when you're trying to find specific fossils. Most of the time, but I think I'll save that issue for a little later. But generally, some masks have some more practical uses now outside of just being cosmetic. Now let's talk fossils themselves. Champions brings back all the types of fossils from the first game, while adding in some interesting new ones into the mix, along with a few real game changers. But before that, thank you for making money an absolute non-issue. You get diamonds like it's nothing now, and I understand that it's OP for the player to earn enough money to buy all the upgrades early on in the game this way. But I felt like most of the shop upgrades from last time were really a waste of money or should have just been included in the player's toolset already. So I really don't care about it, to be honest. But yeah, my problem with jewel rocks and money in the first game is pretty much a non-issue in Champions. Now for the new fossil rocks. The new ones include giant fossil rocks, which pretty much take up the whole screen and the player has to move their field of view around to really get all the fossil clean. Then we have curious fossil rocks. These types actually can't be fully cleaned by only doing one side, so the player has to flip them around to actually get that sucker clean. Admittedly, these two new types aren't really all that interesting. You're pretty much just cleaning 2 to 4 fossils, with the challenge being having more to clean before the usual time runs out. Which once again, there isn't really a line, dude. Not sure why I can't take my time with these. Though, that's where the 2 new consumable items come in. Buster probes, which show you a special spot to hit in rapid succession with your hammer to clean a fossil faster and more efficiently, and time probes, which give the player extra time when used. Now I know both of these sound like great ways for the player to try and clean these behemoth fossils, and you know what, you'd be right when it comes to the time probe, but for some reason the Buster probe doesn't work on these 2 new types. Which doesn't make a lick of sense to me. I kind of feel like these 2 fossils would be perfect for the Buster probes. I mean, these and time probes are expensive for a reason. They're powerful tools for a big job like the giant and curious fossils. I mean, at least Buster probes are still really useful for other types of fossils. Well, except for the other 2 new fossil types that I'll talk about in a second. But yeah, Buster probes just aren't all that great, unless you want to ease your time with most of the regular fossils. Now I'm sure the reason why Buster probes don't work is to incentivize the new mechanic of using DS wireless play to team up with a friend and clean up a fossil together. Did anyone ever do that? Alright, come on now, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4... Yeah, that's about as many as I figured. I'll grant you that it's a cool idea, but I feel the execution left a lot to be desired. But don't worry, my single player brethren. You can still stock up on time probes and just brute force it. I guess it's really not a big deal. Now, what is a big deal are these 2 powerhouses. miraculous and curious fossils. Now, what seems to be just a spray-painted dinosaur skull is actually the radioactive missing link of all life on the planet. Or at least that's my headcanon, as there's no logical explanation as to why inserting a random skull causes a Vivosaur to gain a power boost and a color change. And there's definitely no explanation as to why it turns some Vivosaurs into mutants, a god, dragons, another god, Godzilla. It's really weird and really awesome. Basically, each part of the silver fossil gives a different stat boost and a color scheme for each Vivosaur, except for legendaries. The gold fossil gives a huge stat boost to all stats, including super evolving some specific Vivosaurs into stronger forms. Obviously, gold fossils are a lot harder to come by in-game, but for the most part the silver ones are pretty plentiful. You should have at least one for each of your main Vivosaur team members. I love the mechanics around these two new types of fossils, as they can really give a cool power boost to all of your Vivosaurs, and this Super Evolver shit right here is just cool. And don't go thinking you're the only one with these shiny things, the NPCs use them quite frequently too, so don't get too comfy, alright? This isn't Megas or Z moves, you'll definitely find some random Joe Schmo with an Odin or something, it's really cool. Though I do have one issue. There's no way to store these fossils for later, and yeah, with most other fossils that's not a big deal, but for the shiny fossils, they either rot away in your fossil case until you want to use it, or you do use it and you find it's not the part of the skeleton you wanted and you use it on a Vivosaur you're not using, or you just make your snake monotone. I kind of wish there was a way to know if the shiny is an arm, leg, or something beforehand. You can look it up online, but I wish there was a way in-game. Or maybe if the game just asks you if you want to store a completed fossil for later. Yeah, I know, another nitpick for the pile. Now for the Vivosaurs themselves, a lot of what you remember from the first game carries over pretty well. Vivosaurs still come in one of 5 types, and they each have a different class that kind of tells you the range they prefer to be in. And team skills are still very much around. These 3 attributes have received minor to no changes, save for something like team skills now being usable even if one or more team members is defeated, though the team skill does lose power for every member downed. But yeah, otherwise if you're familiar with the first game you'll fit right in, so let's get into the new stuff. For starters, we have a few new Vivosaurs added to the mix, including some with brand new models, like the new mollusks, a new turtle model, a snake, some dunkles, and of course all the new super evolvers. These new Vivosaurs are really cool and really fill out the ranks with some other prehistoric creatures that the first game didn't really get around to including. Though, of course, there are some other interesting Vivosaurs and we'll talk about them a little later. Now, let's look at the bank system, which allows you to store your Vivosaurs for later. Yeah, like this guy says, it doesn't sound very useful at first, but he goes on to explain that you can actually use this system to gain multiples of the same Vivosaur. In the original Fossil Fighter, you could only have one of each Vivosaur. For example, let's say you have the one Spinex. So, whenever you'd clean a Spinex fossil, it would be integrated into your one Spinex. No matter how many of those fossils you cleaned, it'd all be integrated into the same Spinex. But with the new bank system, you have the option to bank a Spinex for later, and then clean a Spinex fossil and gain another Spinex, allowing you the ability to have multiples of the same Vivosaur, even having a whole team of them if you want. Which is a major thing, as you couldn't do that in the originals, and with the introductions of silver and gold fossils, now you can have every color of Spinex under the sun, with all of them having different stat boosts. And although I didn't do this for myself, the NPCs did this sort of thing plenty, really showing off that having multiples of the same Vivosaur on a team isn't a bad strategy at all. So if you want to go down that route, you know, just do it. Now, for the biggest gameplay difference, the battle system. Similarly to the last game, the battles are set up as a 3v3 turn-based system, with you being allowed to bring 5 Vivosaurs on your person, but only using up to 3 of them in battle. Now, where we differ from the first game is the zones. In the first game, there was 3 zones: attack, 2 support, and an escape zone to escape damage. In Champions, there's only 2 zones, but both have 3 little spots where the whole range thing comes into effect. When you go into battle, you pick between 2 formations. The Jurassic formations lets you have 2 Vivosaurs in the attack zone, and one Venusaur in the support zone, with that one Venusaur in the support zone splitting its support effects between the two attackers and the opponents. In the Cambrian formation, you have one Venusaur in the attack zone and two in the support zone. Then those two support zone Venusaurs give both their effects to the one attack zone and the opponents like the first game. Yeah, no escape zone this time around, which I'm completely fine with. I didn't find the escape zone all that useful in the first game, and spoiler alert for a couple minutes later, I really enjoy this battle system more, so I don't miss the escape zone at all. Now with this new setup comes a few new things you can do. For instance, the two formation options are only how you start the battle. You can move around your Venusaurs for a small power cost at any time, and it will even refund the cost if you change your mind and move your Venusaurs back to where they were. So move your guys around a little bit to see which positions are best for each phase of the battle, because rest assured the opponent is going to be moving either there or your Venusaurs around to make beating you even easier. Now, you remember earlier when I said all that close range, long range stuff was still around, right? Well, here's where that stuff really starts to matter, as each Venusaur has a preferred range that they perform the most optimally at. So be sure you're always moving your Venusaurs to a spot that will make them stronger. Now don't worry about memorizing this kind of stuff, as when it's time to attack, the game will let you know if your Venusaur is at the best range to hit its target. The star here means it's at perfect range, a circle means the range is okay but the attack won't hit as hard, and the X means you're out of range. You can still attack, but the damage will be so low it would have been better to just save your FP for later. But it's not just your Venusaurs that you need to pay attention to, as where the opponent's Venusaurs are positioned is just as important. For example, let's look at my man Dimitro. He is a mid-range attacker, and for the most part he excels at being either in the top two or the bottom two positions, as these are usually where he'll be at perfect range. However, if he has to hit a target that's a lot closer to the back of the support field, Dimitro's perfect range would instead be at the front of the attack zone. This new battle system adds a lot more depth and can be really fun to have you switch up your positions on the fly to either hit the opponent harder or maybe make it so the opponent doesn't hit you as hard. Or, in some specific cases, scramble to get your Venusaurs back in the right order because the opponent Venusaur has a move that changes your Venusaur's positions, or maybe something like an icy battlefield randomizes the positions at the beginning of each turn. Now, I haven't started my playthrough of Frontier at the time of writing or at the time of recording, but I feel safe in stating that this right here is the best battle system in the series. Things like positioning, typings, ranges, team skills, super revolvers, all mixed together perfectly to make this an interesting and fun battle system, where you can change your strategy on the fly to maximize your team's effectiveness. With this rotating positioning system, you can rotate your Venusaurs into the best attack position, then end your turn by rotating them the complete opposite way to take the best position for defense. It's really fun and really interesting. I mean, technically the first game had something similar, but the escape zone really made the combat a lot slower and less interesting. This new system takes all the good from the first game and makes it so much fresher and more unique. You won't find a battle system similar to this nowadays. Well, I guess maybe Yokai Watch, but I really don't think I've played enough of Yokai Watch's battle system to really make the comparison. But before we move on, there is a gripe I have with the gameplay that kind of fits into both the Fossil and Venusaur sections, so I thought I'd save it for after we finish those two. My gripe is that some specific Venusaurs are a real pain to level up, and the reason was because of their fossils. For example, one Venusaur for this playthrough I used was Parapu, one of the new mollusk Venusaurs. Now, in Fossil Fighters, as you find and clean different body parts of a Venusaur, you get tons of experience for them as well. And for Venusaurs with the standard 4 body parts, this was a great way to help your Venusaurs gain experience, and in the first game that was actually how you got more moves. That last part was changed for this game, most likely because of Venusaurs like Parapu who only have one fossil. And I think you can guess where I'm going with this. Parapu was quite behind in levels throughout my playthrough because unlike the other Venusaurs I had, there was no reliable way to level him up to match everyone. Now this wasn't too major of an issue, Champions isn't that difficult of a game, so having a Venusaur that was a little lower level wasn't that big of a deal for most of the playthrough as long as I strategized accordingly. But it really was a pain to have him be on such unequal footing compared to 3 out of my 5 team members. Oh yeah, and apparently some fossils like Igua are so rare that even with the green mask, I wasn't able to find anything other than the head fossil. Even after multiple trips back and forth to and fro to try and get all the fossils to spawn. Now, I had tried to come up with a team for myself for this playthrough beforehand to really show off some of the interesting new Vivosaurs. And as soon as I saw Hibagon, I knew he had to be on the team. Just look at this little bastard. And since he was only available fairly late in the game, I tried to get all 4 pieces of Igua, his pre-super form, so I can use him as soon as I revived him, but it was impossible to find the other pieces, as only the head part was available in this game. What the fuck? Where's the rest of you, little guy? Did somebody I read thought it'd be funny to gatekeep my little cartoon kaiju, those sick bastards? Apparently the only way to gain the other pieces of Igua was through DLC. That bastard from Pokemon Ranger has come to kneecap me once more. But hell, at least the Ranger shit was only really a post-game thing. Except for the random canonical bits. But I digress, at least that stuff was only a post-game venture and didn't affect the main game. What did you do to my baby's coccyx? But if you're familiar with my channel, you maybe already know my interesting opinions on event limited time DLC. And Fossil Fighters Champions isn't safe from this tirade. It's another example of why I hate this stuff, as there is plenty of really cool content. But I'm not going to talk about it since I can't reliably play any of it, and I can't guarantee you will either, so we're skipping it. Yeah, I'm aware you can sort of get it through exploits, and I even have a pre-owned cartridge with the DLC Vivosaurs on it. But no, I hate that limited time stuff, so no matter how cool it is, I'm not going to talk about it. But I'm also not going to let it really affect my opinion on the game, at least to a point. I guess another way to get Igua would have been to use the fossil cannon. I was going to go over this last time, but sadly I couldn't find a way to fit it into this script last time. So instead I decided to move it over to this discussion of this game, and it ended up being timely and goes along with the Igua thing. Basically, the fossil cannon is Fossil Fighters' version of online, where you're able to shoot fossils over Wi-Fi to a friend, and I even think you can even battle them too. But to be honest, I've never tried any of the Fossil Fighters multiplayer for myself, and even if I wanted to, the DS Wi-Fi has been shut down for years, and it won't be too long before Frontiers has its Wi-Fi shut off as well, though I have heard that the Fossil Fighter community has found a workaround to bring Wi-Fi features back. But yeah, I guess I could have dug up Igua in Fossil Fighters 1, and then send them over to Champions, except my save file for Fossil Fighters for some reason deleted itself along with the project file for the last video, which completely ruined my plan to make a bunch of presets for the whole series of videos and then re-edit them together for a combined video. I don't know why I told you that other than to just let that little designer in me vent a little bit. But yeah, even if I could trade from the original, that doesn't change the fact that having a fossil for a Vivosaur in the game being locked off in DLC, or if you bought the other game, is just plain dumb, and I really don't like that. On the bright side, I did get some use out of Lil Hibby and his sick moves in battles, somewhat, but not near enough as I would have if I had a way to get his other fossil parts, and get him to the appropriate level. Also, 2 of his moves share the same name. I'm not sure why that is. Hibby Howitzer is a dope as hell name though. Name so nice, you had to say it twice. The 2 announcers this time around are 2 guys known as Trip, Sarah, and Tyranno. Yeah, the announcers this time around are actual talking dinosaurs. That's an interesting change. Trip and Ty are about the same as the announcers last time when it comes to their advice. It's okay, just take it with a grain of salt, but now that I think about it, I'd say they're pretty much the same as the guys last time. Just 2 fun and cool characters this time around with more unique designs. Though Trip's Sarah might be catching a case if he doesn't quit oogling every female in sight. Tyranno's been trying to hold him back, but it's becoming more and more clear that this is a serious problem. Alright, let's get some music playing in here. If you thought the music was good last time, well, you were right. And it's really good here too. Fossil Fighters Champions soundtrack is so catchy. It's not all memorable, but when you hear even a note of the music, all the memories will flood back, and yes, I guess that is the definition of memorable, but man, this shit is good. If you never played Champions, at least listen to that stellar original soundtrack. And that goes for all 3 of these games. I like all their soundtracks quite a bit. But if you're not convinced, let me give you some samples of Champion's buffet of jams. Starting off with the main battle theme, it has this really chill and happy vibe that ironically just kinda makes you ready to fight. I get that that sounds a little weird, maybe it's just better if I let you listen to it for yourself. The different city themes are all really fun and relaxing, giving you this cool vibe between searching for fossils. My favorite of the three has to be the Desert Two-Step from Cranial City. It's kind of like the main theme for Champions for me, as it kind of embodies a lot about the game, as it has this really adventure-y and relaxed vibe. Now my all-time favorite theme has to be the main theme for the evil team this time around. So I guess I'll go ahead and put up the spoiler tag here, since the story is right after this anyway. Make sure to skip to the time on screen to avoid all story spoilers for Fossil Fighters Champions. Now for the main theme for the Bare Bones Brigade, it's honestly perfect. It's got this really catchy and cool rock theme, but it also has elements of like a monster movie soundtrack, with some of the parts feeling like they jump out at you and scream boo! And they got a mix of horror and the foot stomping percussion. It's just perfect for the guys who use skeletal dinosaurs to fight. I love everything about this theme. Now let's talk about the story so we can learn more about our spooky opponents. We start by seeing the biggest change added to Champions. You get to pick your character's gender this time. I kinda missed the whole color scheme system from last time, but hey, it's 2010 and girls can be gamers, so it's about time Fossil Fighters got with the times. The times being over 10 years ago. Man, I feel old. Now, the canonical names of our two protagonists are Dino and Dinah. Yeah, I know those names kinda suck. I mean, I guess this is the same series with a guy named Diggins, but that one was at least kinda subtle and it was a fun pun. Dino and Dinah just feel like really generic names for this kind of game, you know? Well, whatever one you pick, in my case I picked Dino, we open the game by seeing Dino and his best friend Todd go into some woods to check out a rampaging Vivosaur that's attacking anyone near it. Yep, a completely normal thing for children to do. But once the Vivosaur finds them, our little dipshits realize how awful of a plan that was, and they make a break for it, only to end up trapped on a cliff's edge, waiting for their doom. Till a man on a pterodactyl comes in and tells the two to jump towards him. Todd is scared stiff, but Dino grabs his hand and they jump to their deaths. Nah, I'm just joshing you, buddy. They jump to the P-Terra and they escape the Vivosaur. You know, I say P-Terra, but I guess it's just Terra because the P in pterodactyl is silent. I really like Fossil Fighters, but I'm not a big fan of how all the names are just these awkward little shortened versions of the dinosaurs' actual names. Some of them work like Spinax, but I don't know, man. Terra for pterodactyl? It kind of feels like when you're a kid and you're trying to nickname your Pokemon and you can't come up with anything special. Sure, sometimes it works, like naming a Bulbasaur Soar, but like, do you really want to be the guy with a Charmander named Char? No one wants to be that guy. As they make their landing, the boys get acquainted to their hero, a man by the name of Joe Wild West. A man the boys are all too familiar with as he is the best fossil fighter in the world and our boys are his biggest fans. Joe tells us about the rogue Allosaur and how when a Vivosaur is abandoned by its fighter, its true nature swells up and they become hostile. Not sure about that true nature shit, but Joe says he's here to capture the rogue Vivosaur, something that's never been done in the rest of the series to my knowledge, as you only get Vivosaurs as gifts or through cleaning. Joe decides that this chance encounter may be good experience for the boys and allows Todd the chance to try and battle the rogue Vivosaur with one of his Vivosaurs. Todd wants to take him up on the offer, but he comes down with a stomach ache, and lets Dino be the one to battle instead. and after picking one of 4 starter Venusaurs, Dino battles and defeats the rogue Venusaur, and Joe is so impressed he lets Dino keep the starter. Kind of a dick move to not offer Todd one as well, but whatever. Though now I'm curious as to what the laws are around having Venusaurs outside of fossil parks. I mean, they can't just let any 10-year-old just run around with a powerful creature at their disposal. Well, actually, every monster taming game lets a child keep a hold of that kind of firepower. I guess it all just kind of works itself out. Anyway, cut 2 years later and our boys are setting out to participate in the Celestial Cup, a tournament being held by the one and only Joe Wild West, with the prize being the fossil park the tournament is being held in. The boys are given a pair of paleo pagers to keep track of their tournament proceedings. Were pagers still a thing in 2010? But obviously, it's not too much of a tournament with only 2 people, so of course, like the last game, there's a bunch of fun and interesting people to fight, including a con man, a princess, and of course our 2 other rivals, other than Todd. We have Pauline, a girl with a mask who seems to have some issues with her confidence and she can't even speak to people without her mask. And Rupert, an edgy 2006 anime character with a gross fan base to match. Though as you may have guessed, he is a bit sad on the inside. So as Todd and Dino get ready to take on this tournament, they are informed that their first opponents are each other. Yeah, what would usually be your main rival is instead the first guy you beat to move on in the tourney. And yeah, sorry Todd, but you're beat out in the first round. He seems to not let it get him down though, as he resolves to support his friend Dino on the sidelines. And going forward, the main plot involves Dino going through and winning his matches in the tournament, including having to face off against and end up helping Rupert and Pauline with their problems, such as helping Rupert understand the bonds of friendship and even getting him to rediscover how much he loves being a fossil fighter, something he was forced to forget so he could become a walking billboard for his dad's company. Though his dad later admits that he acted the way he did because he just didn't want Rupert to taste the sting of defeat. That doesn't make a lick of sense when you consider any of his actions in the story. The game should have just stuck with the whole walking billboard thing, that was way more interesting. Then with Pauline, we learned about her being a very shy person at heart, and the mask she wears is actually a magic one that helps her to become more confident, though maybe a lot more than she intended. And through the help of Dino and friends, she starts to gain more confidence in herself without the mask. Also throughout the game, Dino gets to meet Professor Nigel Scatterly, the foremost expert of the Callisto Island's history, and the curator of the Fossil Park's museum. Scatterly is a bit scatterbrained though, so usually Dino has to help him find the Callisto slablets. Tablets that are made of bone that tell the history of an ancient kingdom on the islands that was ruled by someone named Zonga Zonga. And most interestingly, Zonga Zonga actually held fossil battles in his kingdom long before the technology was developed by Dickens and Richmond, meaning he had some kind of magical power that brought dead dinosaurs back to life, and he even used them to hold his own fossil fighter tournaments, with the winner of the tournament being declared the strongest and would be the person that Zonga Zonga would then possess by— ugh, gross, he shoves his skull into their heads? That is the grossest form of body-snatching immortality I have ever heard of. Ugh. Though, now that I think about it, I guess we are doing the same thing when we integrate new fossils into a Venusaur. Either way, it's still gross. But at some point in the past, the people rose up against Zonga Zonga, and they sealed him inside a tomb, where he hopefully is still sealed to this day. Anyways, there's a skeleton who just stole the Jumbotron. I hope that has nothing to do with the evil necromancer we were just talking about. Oh. Yeah, it's not a monster taming game without a new villain who's got a bone to pick with our protagonists. And today's team is spooky flavored with the Bare Bones Brigade. Yeah, I'm not sure what makes their bones bare, and if it's an innuendo, then I don't want to know. This time around, instead of trying to take over the park like the 3 Bs last time, this group, led by the evil Don Boneyard and his 3 boneheaded commanders, are trying to cancel the Celestial Tournament for some mysterious reason. They do this by trying multiple different methods, all headed up by the 4 numbskulls in charge. Whether it was by taking out the power or kidnapping female fighters with the promise of extreme luxury, which they weren't lying about by the way, they did give those girls luxury and service their every need. It was kinda like what happened to Oolong, but less creepy. And they even trapped the fighters in a real jam! Again, there's a comment section if you have complaints. Now the Bare Bones Brigade are probably an overall improvement to the BB Bandits. For one thing, the actual grunts themselves actually get some time to spotlight their funny personalities, unlike the bandits who mostly just acted as fodder, and they kind of made this weird little noise. But I'm kind of mixed on whether or not they're better or worse than the bandit trio. The brigade trio definitely get a lot more screen time apart to really show off their separate character traits and gimmicks. One is a rocker with a jelly obsession, one claims to be a hippie but still fights all the same, and one is a hipster. Wow, that word was probably new in 2010, but now it just sounds so old to me. Why does hipster sound old and hippie doesn't? Time is just so weird, isn't it? I like all three of these guys though, and I like how they're just as effective when they're separated as they are as a unit. The trio last time had a Team Rocket type vibe, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it just made the bandits feel really small, you know? Sure, you had Bulwart and the Grunt Hive Mind, but they were all just really fillery, you get what I mean? It's like when Pokemon brings back Giovanni and some random rocket grunts. Those guys are really never developed or fun, they're just kind of stock copy-paste bad guys. The trio this time around feel more like the admin types in Pokemon. I really don't want to use those guys as an example because most of them are kind of lame. But you get what I mean. The new trio kind of just fills out the Bad Bones Brigade, and giving the grunts actual names is just awesome. Yeah, I'm sick of that Grunt A, Grunt B type shit. You know, until a battle starts and then all the grunts share the same title. But who cares about that when I get to square up with Scotty Bones? Well, at some point in the game, Joe calls Dino, Todd, and Pauline to his office to brand these three the Callisto Patrol, since all three of them have had a hand in stopping the Bare Bones Brigade throughout the game. And eventually, Dino, Pauline, and Rupert, who joins up later, and Todd got ill with a cold during this part of the game, so he actually misses out on quite a bit. Anyway, the other three go to stop the Brigade trio from taking the park's electricity, when suddenly they're swallowed by the Great Bonehemoth, and they seem to be trapped inside the beast. But with the help of a sentient ball named William and his friend Robinson, they learn that they have to defeat the Bonehemoth's monstrous organ, Lord Tonzilla.
We got him!
But how do we get out?
We have to wait until nature calls.
Hello?
After the escape, the Brigade trio gives back the park's electricity fossils. Don't ask, everything in this park runs on fossils. The trio give back the fossils as a way to say thank you for saving them from Bonehemoth. Of course, Don Boneyard isn't really happy that all his attempts to ruin the tournament have been ruined. So he goes to his Plan Z, to sink the fossil park by breaking apart the spinal pillars that hold up the islands. He announces his plan to all the park's fighters and tells them that if they want to live, they had better evacuate the island while they still have the chance. Of course, the Callisto Patrol won't let that happen, as the kids find a special fossil containing a lot of calcium that can repair the spinal pillar. You thought I was joking about this place being ran on fossils, didn't you? Yeah, no, I was very serious. The patrol gets their hands on the calcium and they split off to take on the brigade and fix the pillars. When they report back to Joe, he tells them that he now has the location of the Bad Bones base, and the patrol heads off to take on the Dawn. After making his way through the base, Dino finally challenges the Dawn, though before they get into it, the Dawn seems to recognize Dino from somewhere. And after beating him, he tells Dino not to trust Joe Wild West, and then he makes his escape. After getting back to the park, it's time for the finals of the Cup, and the last battle is between Dino and Rupert. Oh, I guess I lost. So, does that mean Rupert is the champion? Nah, of course not, though I would like to see a game with a tournament setting one day that takes the wins and especially the losses into account into how the story progresses. But that also sounds like a humongous pain in the ass to write and develop, so how about we just run it back? After beating Rupert, Dino is invited to Joe's office to talk, and Todd decides to tag along since earlier in the game when Todd tries to talk to Joe about the incident at the beginning of the game with the rogue Vivasaur, but Joe didn't really seem to remember anything about it, so Todd reasons that he must have just remembered and that's why he invited Dino up to see him. Todd? Buddy, if that was the reason, why didn't he invite you? The boys head up to Joe's office, and at first Joe is surprised to see Todd, but says it won't interfere with his plans anyway. So he traps the boys in his office and reveals his scheme. We find out that the man before us isn't the real Joe Wild West. Some years back, Joe Wild West found a stone pyramid that contained a coffin that sealed Zonga Zonga inside. And as soon as he opened the coffin, Zonga Zonga took control of Joe Wild West. But he felt that Joe's body was too old, so he decided to host a tournament to find the strongest body around once again for him to inhabit. And that tournament was the Callisto Cup Dino just won. I can just imagine Rupert downstairs going, "Yeah, that's what you get for running it back, asshole." But before Zonga Zonga could insert his bony skull into the boy's body, I could have wrote that 100 different ways better than whatever the fuck that was. A hole is blown into the side of the building, and in a similar situation as to what happened in the beginning plays out, with Dino grabbing Todd and escaping a dangerous situation by jumping towards a bony pterodactyl. Oh man, I wonder who owns that. Of course, by this point, it's pretty obvious what's going on. The process of Zonga Zonga's body snatching leaves the victim's skull outside of the body, and it turns out that skull has sentience and is able to hop around. So somehow, after Joe was forced out of his own body, he made or he forced somebody to make a robot body for his skull, which he then used to create his Don Boneyard persona. Then, using his new body and all the bony sores he found in the stone pyramid, he formed the Bare Bones Brigade to put a stop to Zonga Zonga's tournament to prevent him from finding a stronger body to inhabit. But of course, as we already know, Zonga Zonga founded the Callisto Patrol to combat the brigade, leaving Joe's plane in the dirt for the moment. However, now that Dino and Todd are informed on the situation, they decide to help Joe get his body back and seal Zonga Zonga away again. To do this, they're going to need to get the help of Scatterly, who's the only one who can find a way to stop Zonga Zonga. Though that's not as easy as it sounds, as Zonga Zonga in Joe's body announces to the islands that Dino cheated in the tournament and now the whole park is after him, including the 3 staff leaders. Those guys are literally worthless, and I would have started swinging if they started talking like this to me. "Oh, I'm so sorry to disappoint Mr. I won't go into a volcano because it's too hot, so I'll send some kids to do it instead." And then he shows up at the volcano anyway after all the work is done. Kent, you're a lucky bastard that you're a fictional character, because if you weren't, it'd be on sight, man. On sight! I hate that guy. But before the angry mob could attempt to take out Dino, Scatterly, oh, and I guess Pauline and Rupert are here now too, Todd comes in, and as the Chad he is, he takes on the mob of people. You know, we probably could have just KO'd all these guys in like 2 seconds. Hey, I'm kind of having a moment here. I mean, Pauline and Rupert really don't do anything for the next little bit. They really could just stay here and fight with you. Dude! Okay, just saying. Dino makes it back to the base with Scatterly, and I guess Rupert and Pauline are here too for some reason, where they and Joe make a plan for Dino and Scatterly to conduct a potentially racist plan to put on masks based on Tyranno, and then sneak over to the stone pyramid. While I guess Pauline and Rupert just watch a movie or something? I don't know, you two really should have stayed and helped Todd, or maybe try to convince the townspeople or something. You just don't do anything right now. As Dino and Scatterly leave, Joe hops inside Dino's pocket so he can go alongside them. Dino's pockets must be like a black hole to hold fossils, Dino Meadows tools, and now a human skull inside of them. The 3 of them make their way to the pyramid that really should have been in the desert. I know they're going for a more South American pyramid thing, but that desert is literally just a room with sand in it. It needed something, man. But the 3 of them make it into the pyramid where they have to face a trial. I mean, Dino has to face a trial to see if he's worthy to hold the mythical rubber hammer that shoots a skull out of a person's head. That is so gross. Now that we have the ultimate weapon, the gang teams up and storms Joe's building, prepared to knock the skull out of Zonga Zonga. I'm sorry, that's just such a gross way to handle the body switching thing. I like it, it just kind of bothers me, which I'm pretty sure it's supposed to, so I guess it's alright. It's still kind of gross. On the way up, Dino has to fight a possessed Todd, and after being snapped out of it, the 2 boys head up to face Zonga Zonga together, with the mythical rubber hammer in tow. Shit. Well, Todd goes after the hammer by scaling down the outside of the building, while Dino holds Zonga Zonga off. After beating Zonga Zonga, can I just say ZZ for short? I'm just gonna say ZZ for short, because saying Zonga Zonga this many times is really starting to mix it up in my brain. So ZZ is about to take Dino's body, but Todd climbs back up and throws the hammer to Dino, allowing him to literally give ZZ an out-of-body experience. With ZZ defeated and Joe getting his body back, the crew tries to grab ZZ, but he slips out of everyone's grasp, with Rupert going into the elevator to catch him by himself. Yeah, I know you can see where this is going, but I'm gonna act surprised later anyway. The gang catches up to Rupert, who says he's got the skull stashed away, and they head off to the pyramid to seal away ZZ. But not before Rupert has a nice little ominous laugh to himself, you know, just e-boy things. When everybody gathers at the pyramid, they notice that Rupert is missing, and then ZZ reveals himself to have taken over Rupert's body. Whoa, I didn't see that coming, whoa! And since Rupert and Dino are on the same or similar level of power, ZZ decides that he has all he needs to start his world domination scheme, and raises another pyramid out of the sea to act like his flying fortress. Joe tries to send the staff leaders up there on the pterodactyl, but as usual, those morons fail, and sadly Kent survives. For now. But now the plan is to use the fossil cannon to shoot somebody at Mach 4 towards the flying fortress, and take a wild guess who's chosen for that job. So Dino and Rupert's sentient skull are sent hurtling towards the fortress. The two approach ZZ, who is now using his most powerful undead monsters, the zombie sores. And after beating them, ZZ has really had enough of this dumb-ass grade schooler wrecking his plans, so he reveals his final form. A death god dinosaur with unlimited life-altering powers, except for when it comes to his own demise apparently, as after knocking him out of his final form, he literally shatters into dust because he can't wrap his thick skull around friendship. Cool. Dino and Rupert then make their escape from the crumbling fortress thanks to the help of Todd on a pterodactyl. You slackers just didn't try hard enough, did you? We are then treated to a scene of Joe Wild West, congratulating Dino for all his accomplishments. Yeah, Dino's accomplishments, assholes! And then Joe tries to hand over the park to Dino, as that was the original award for the tournament. Dino declines the offer, however, since, you know, giving a 10-year-old ownership of a country is a really dumb idea, Joe. And, you know, Joe Wild West was the reason that Hunter and Todd are where they are today, so him giving them the island just didn't feel right to them. And also because they're 10 years old. The game ends with a bonfire between our heroes as they talk about their time here at the park and of course thanking Dino for helping them all to be brave. Before then mentioning that they're going to try to one-up each other in the next upcoming tournament, the Callisto Super Cup, which will take up the majority of the postgame. And that's the story of Fossil Fighters Champions. And honestly, it's probably better than the first game, at least in a few ways. I'm pretty mixed on which story is overall better, because the majority of Champions is really cool and interesting, but I don't think it ever really reaches how cool the concept of the Dinarians were. I'm not saying I just want the same plot over again. In fact, when it comes to the early to mid sections of the game, I think Champions blows Fossil Fighters out of the water. Fossil Fighters' plot had a lot of characters that just have a problem that you fix and you never really see that character again. In Champions, every little story quest has to do with either developing the main cast or setting up plot points for later. That's not to say I don't like having side characters that do their thing and then leave. You've got to know at this point how much I love Knick Knack. It just felt like Champions was more tightly written. Things like multiple character arcs going on in our main cast and having the villain group feeling ironically more fleshed out is pretty cool. And I like that the admins joined up with the brigade because, you know, they were outcasts and they felt like they had a home with Don Boneyard. And in the end, when Joe admits to them that he was lying about being Don Boneyard, they still stay loyal to him and they hang around him because, you know, he was the first person to accept them for who they are. Even if he was kind of a dick to them as Don Boneyard, yeah, I do have a pretty big gripe about the whole twist with ZZ and Joe. I just don't buy it. Like, sure, there's nothing in the story to really say that the twist couldn't happen, but the few interactions with Zonga Joe and Don Wild West don't really sell the whole body swap thing. Like, we never have a moment where the game gives us a hint to what's going on other than that one moment where Don recognizes Dino and Zonga Joe just doesn't. Other than that, Zonga Joe may as well have just been Joe Wild West and Don Boneyard his own character. I really wish we had a moment or two with Zonga Joe where he just slips up once or twice. Maybe after he hears about the brigade causing an issue that threatens the tournament and he just gets so annoyed and angry about it, he just loses the accent and gets his normal text box back before quickly catching himself and apologizing. Or maybe Don can have a moment where the admins expect him to lash out and he slips up and feels sorry for them, and tries to be nice to them, bringing back his normal accent too. That's something I really wish they played with more in the story, the accents. as both Dawn and Zonga Joe are using different accents than their usual ones, and that's normally how characters in story catch on that something is off. The accent or a character's body language is the first thing to go when a disguised character is upset. Because whether something makes you mad or sad, that thing is what your brain will focus on, and it's really hard to hide your true feelings when intense or powerful emotions swell up in you. And it was weird that nothing like that happened in the game. Or maybe instead you could have had Joe have his normal accent, but when you get to the islands you notice he doesn't have it anymore. And maybe you can have a moment where your character and Todd call him out on it, and Zonga Joe just says that's only for marketing or something. And then you can have that nugget in the player's brain, wondering if it's really just for show. And if it is, why did Joe have it when he saved us back then and there was no cameras around? And then this little nugget gets even more interesting when Don Boneyard reveals himself and he has the same exact accent Joe used to have. I know this kind of thing would have made it more obvious that Joe is Zonga Zonga, but the idea of a body-snatching necromancer is revealed to the player very early on, so I'd say most would have already figured that he'd make an appearance in the game somewhere, especially since they did that exact same thing with the Ganesh last time. And how on earth do you have somebody like Joe Wild West with a thick and unique accent from the rest of the cast in your story, and you don't use that for your body snatcher plotline? That's so obvious and was handed to the writers on a silver platter. Zonga Zonga has been sealed in a stone tomb for over 1,000 years, and when he finally escapes, he gets trapped inside of a body that he feels is old and weak, with nobody else around him that he feels is worthy for his power. So he, after waiting 1,000 or so years, needs to wait at least 2 more to set up a whole tournament that has contestants from all over the world. And when his plan is finally starting to bear some fruit, some bare-bones bozos start messing everything up. Now, I'm not a death god dinosaur necromancer, but if I was, I'd be so pissed off. Zonga Zonga should be ready to snap at the drop of a hat. There's no way he's keeping it together the whole game, especially when he realizes that Don Boneyard is Joe. You know that had to be his first thought as soon as he saw him on the Jumbotron. I mean, sure, they do get their normal accents back after the reveal, but that's just way too late. You could have at least let Joe drop the accent after he recognizes Dino or something. That would have made perfect sense to drop it right there. And here's the thing I really don't buy about this game's plot. Don Boneyard is not Joe Wild West. And I don't mean that's his persona or something, I mean these two can't be the same people. I can expect somebody like Zonga Zonga to lie, use people, and even threaten people's lives, but I cannot expect the same thing from Joe Wild West, the pinnacle of what a fossil fighter should be. He's brave, strong, righteous, kind-hearted. I could see him saying screw trying to convince people I'm the real Wild West. You know, that probably won't work since he looks like a Bubble from Zelda. Yeah, Bubble, I have no idea why it's called that either. So, he hires a bunch of people and makes an evil gang to scare people away from Zonga Zonga's grasp. I can buy that. What I don't buy is Joe Wild West just shit-talking his subordinates that supposedly he saved from the cruelty of the rest of the world. And oh, I don't know, maybe the fact that he almost killed a shit ton of people by sinking 3 whole islands? Dude, what the hell was that about? I mean, sure, he did try to warn people to evacuate the island, but we never saw anyone actually evacuate. There's still tons of people around when Dino and friends head down to stop Joe, who by the way is halfway into caving in the damn place. And even if people had evacuated and the island sank, guess what? Zonga Zonga would have been the first person on the copter out of there, and he would have just set up another tournament somewhere else. This plan of yours only threatens innocent people living on the inhabited islands you were about to sink. And this isn't even your plan Z or anything, this was like the 4th thing you tried. Like, maybe you could have had him do a kidnap plot with Scatterly where he tries to butter him up to get Zonga Zonga's weakness. Or maybe explain the situation to Scatterly, but nah, I guess Joe forgot about the professor whose museum is right beside his house. And Joe is pretty much just let off the hook for all this. I mean, he apologizes and all that, but that plan would have put thousands of people in danger. Joe Wild West is an asshole. These two issues are probably the only things holding me back from saying Champion's story is amazing. It's definitely good, and it definitely blows the original out of the water in a few ways, but I think when it comes to the big twist, it just kind of falls flat. There wasn't enough here to really make it feel like an amazing twist. And you know, I'm not going to sit here and say Bulwart was a better twist villain, that guy just sucked. But the twist with Zonga Zonga when compared to all the twists and turns with the Dinarians, it's really hard to say that Zonga Zonga was better when the Dinarian stuff was all around really interesting and it really added to the story when you replay it, and you get to see new aspects of it in a new light. Like, there's no moment in Champions that was as cool as figuring out the sandal fossils were the same sandals that Dickens lost in the past in the first game. There's nothing like that because they never let Zonga Zonga or Joe slip up, even in a subtle way, other than that one little moment each. It's like a mystery where the author doesn't want the audience to catch on easily, so they make the hints too well hidden, or just not have them at all until it's time for the twist. That's a really boring thing to do in a story, especially when your way of doing it is by making the twist characters pretty much be completely different characters the whole game without even a hint of who they truly could be. Those two little moments just weren't good enough. But the quality of Champion's story isn't entirely reliant on the twist. Like I said, the whole thing is more tightly written, and that lets the story have a theme. And that theme is to face your fears. Everybody in Champions is afraid of something. Pauline is afraid to speak without her mask. Rupert is afraid of telling his father his true feelings. Joe is afraid not only of Zonga Zonga ruining the world, but also the idea that Zonga Zonga is right about him being too old and too weak. Todd's afraid of everything, and hell, even the dog is afraid of being itself. And it's only through our player characters' actions that any of these issues are resolved, teaching the other characters to be brave not only for themselves, but also the ones that are around them. And I can't think of a better example of this than Todd. Holy shit, have I been dying to talk about Todd, as he is absolutely the best character in the game. Todd starts off as the usual best friend character who conveniently has a stomach ache every time there's a problem going on. But if we're being honest, Todd is a much better character than I remember him being. Like I said, he plays the role of the best friend character, but he has this real smart aleck attitude to anyone who isn't Dino, and when they let him, he'll roast somebody alive. He shit talks like nobody else, and it is so funny sometimes. But as even he admits, he's too scared to back it up, and I don't blame him for being such a scaredy cat. Todd's problem is that he's a normal kid in a world full of shonen protagonists. Of course Todd is scared when a bunch of criminals show up wielding the undead. Most kids his age are afraid of broccoli, much less the Fossil Mafia. But Todd isn't a stagnant character. He looks up to Dino, Pauline, and Rupert. And after Dino helps them overcome their fears, Todd eventually learns to overcome his own, standing up for his friends in a memorable moment where he sacrifices himself to an angry mob to give his friends a chance to escape, even telling all those angry people to come at him. That's so cool. And he gets another moment later on, because after he's free from Zonga Zonga's control, he helps Dino take on Zonga Zonga, but then the hammer is knocked away. So Todd bravely scales down the building, and then right before Dino's body is taken over, Todd makes it back up and screams something similar to like, "I'm not the strongest fighter, but I'm one hell of a climber," and he throws the hammer to Dino. That's also really cool. Watching Todd grow up and become brave and confident was amazing. But we find out something else about Todd. After you free him from Zonga Zonga's control, Todd admits that he was jealous of Dino the whole time, and he was trying his best to hide it. Which, yeah, of course Todd would be jealous. He's a normal kid whose best friend is Goku. Imagine you're watching your best friend doing all the cool stuff that you wanted to do. Becoming a champion, beating bad guys, and making friends with all kinds of cool people. Of course this would eat Todd up inside. This would be hard for anybody, but for a kid, this is 20 times harder. Because if Dino is Goku, then Todd wouldn't be Yamcha, Tien, Krillin, Roshi, Piccolo, Bulma, Vegeta, or Oolong. He'd be Chaozu, somebody who honestly doesn't do anything outside of his first appearance except sacrifice himself, shit-talk somebody, and most importantly, stays in the background. There's a point in the game where Todd is actually sick for once, and he's taken out of the action for quite a while. and during said time, Dino, Pauline, and Rupert have a bonfire together, where they discuss things like the tournament, the bad guys, and all this stuff that Todd, on some level, really wished he could be a part of. And the whole time this cutscene was playing, I'm like, poor Todd. He is up sick somewhere and nobody, including his best friends, are even talking about him. Like, you know, if he heard that Dino is having a campfire with his new friends talking about their new adventures without him, that would utterly crush him. So I totally love this idea that he was trying to be a good friend and hide how jealous he was, but then Zonga Zonga used all those emotions to control him against Dino. Man, I loved Rosie last time, but there is no competition. Todd is just a much better friend character. Rosie was funny, but there wasn't a lot of depth to her. Todd isn't as funny as Rosie was, but he's a much more well-rounded character, and I think he's a good example of not just the theme of champions, but also of how well the story is written. Save for some issues. Also, whoever decided to make the villains of a game about facing your fears, a bunch of undead dinosaurs being headed up by a necromancing skull, with a demon dinosaur form, needs a fucking raise, my man. I mean, a necromancer is already a cool villain idea for the series that's whole thing is raising things from the dead. That is some stupid fun irony, by the way. But that, plus the theme, plus some of the music having a monster movie vibe, that is completely and utterly genius. I love that. The post-game for Champions has some similarity to the last game, mostly in terms of the rematches and the legendary hunts, which includes what has to be my favorite post-game legendary hunt, like, ever. So to get Zonga Zonga and his zombie dinosaurs, you pretty much have to go back to his flying fortress, where Joe has apparently set up an attraction where people can pay to beat the unliving shit out of Zonga Zonga's corpse. That is hilarious. But the main thing going on in the post-game is the Callistio Super Cup, like I mentioned before. But what I didn't mention before was that Rosie actually comes back for the post-game tournament. I mean, she's not the only character that comes back, as the Dig-a-Dig Chief shows up earlier in the game to help take the mask off of Pauline, when it kind of possesses her for a while, long story there. And the Dinarians are in the DLC, but yeah, Rosie comes back and claims that she is the new champion of Vivasor Island. And she's kind of a bitch now. I don't know if it was Hunter picking Duna over you, Todd being a more developed character than you, or maybe you were in space without a helmet on or something, but Rosie is really rude for no reason, and what's with this champion shit? Vivasor Island has ranks, but there wasn't anything about champions and how their league was structured. And hey, while we're talking about the first game, where the hell are all the Dinarians? I mean, we saw Dinarians start to intermingle with human society as soon as the credits of the last game, and now they're just nowhere to be seen outside of DLC? Like, how cool would it have been to have a Dinarian as a rival or something? I mean, they are a race of people who can turn into dinosaurs. You can't tell me there wasn't a single one of them that wasn't at least partially interested in becoming a fossil fighter and then entering this big tournament. We spent so long trying to give those guys a home and they don't appear in the sequel? What's with that? Oh, it's about time to prank the spoiler-free people. And that, my friends, is how Abraham Lincoln full Nelson Genghis Khan into the Gigantosaurus's mouth on the planet Zed. Oh, spoiler-free people are back. Don't worry, that last sentence didn't have anything to do with the spoilers we were just talking about for like an hour or so. Or was it? You won't know till you play the game. And what a damn fine game it is. Fossil Fighters Champions is pretty close to a perfect sequel, save for a few issues, but the majority of it is fantastic. If you haven't played this game, man, you're just straight up missing out. Fossil Fighters Champions has some of the funnest gameplay you'll find in a monster taming game. Its music is fantastic. Sure, the storyline has a few bumps along the way, but overall it's very well written. And for the DS in 2010, I'd say this game looks really good. Champions, in a word, is just pure amazement.